Thank you. So I want to start our conversation tonight with a question. Have you ever wondered why a virus is contagious, but the cure isn't? Why is it that negative or destructive things spread faster and farther, and productive things don't? I don't know the answer to those questions either, but I do know this. This phenomenon exists beyond epidemiology. We see it in group behaviors as well. Think about children for a second. When children are growing up and learning all new kinds of words, they can choose to hyperfixate on any of them. But for some reason, it's always that emphatic F-bomb you drop when someone cuts you off in traffic that becomes their new favorite word. Why is that? This trend fascinates me because I have a particular interest in leadership, the way the behavior of one person impacts the behavior of another. My passion for this subject is rooted in the belief that the solution to every challenge begins with quality leadership. If you put the right people in the right places with the right skills and resources, anything is possible. So, if leadership is the precursor to every solution, to every cure, what if we made it contagious? I've dedicated the last 7 years of my career to exploring this possibility, and as a result, I've had the privilege of traveling the world and working with leaders in a variety of capacities. These are student leaders on college campuses, government officials, and even executives of multi-billion-dollar corporations. I realized a few years ago this access was a privilege. I had the opportunity to observe universal trends in leadership behaviors. My scope of work permeated generational, socioeconomic, and cultural differences. I used my unique access as an opportunity to conduct a social experiment. So today I want to share with you how I created that social experiment, the results derived from it, insights that you can gain from it, and how you can walk away today and do things that make the cure contagious. So, my social experiment was simple. I had a group of leaders that were committed to their leadership development. They walked in the room and I asked them this simple question. What do you think is most important for engaging and developing your people? And I framed it as a multiple choice question with 5 options, A through E. A being incentives, B being recognition, C being clear goals, D being interpersonal support, and E being support for making work-related progress. All they had to do is circle one answer, A through E, and then justify why they picked that answer. After they got their answers together, I facilitated a conversation around this question. To do that, I hung up posters around the room that represented the letter of each answer they could have selected, and I asked them to stand in that corner and talk to the people that agreed with them. When you did that, the room was like this. You had 5 pockets of people who all selected the same answer, and I asked them to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes having a discussion about why they picked that answer, and use that as an opportunity to gather as much evidence as possible, because I was going to switch up the groups. And here's how I did that. I had them count off 1 through 5 in each group, and then the room looked like this. Now each person is assigned a number. While they were having their discussions, I snuck around the room and I changed the posters. And now instead of each section of the room representing letters, it represents numbers. So I asked them to now go stand in the room, the section of the room that represented the number they were assigned. And when you do that, the room looks like this. Now you have a collection of people who all disagree with each other on the answer, and I asked them to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes trying to convince as many people as possible to change their answers. After the 10 to 15 minutes passes, I asked them to turn to their seats and answer these 4 reflection questions. The first question was, which group was easier to talk to? The group you agree with or the group you disagree with? The second question was, which group do you wish you had more time with? The group you agree with or the group you disagree with? Third question was, did you pick your answer based on your personal needs or experiences, yes or no? And did you change your answer after hearing the reasoning and rationale of other people? Now keep in mind, these are all people who have some leadership duty. They are either currently leaders or people identified as future leaders of an organization who all have some duty or responsibility to understand the needs of others, to meet the needs of others, and to change people's minds and behavior. The results? Less than 5% of people changed their mind. Now this answer didn't really surprise me. I expected the number to be low, maybe not this low, but out of curiosity, I asked a follow-up question. I said, okay, well, what would it take for you to change your mind? They said, well, I need some data, I need some research. And then I said, that's funny you say that, because this question was not a question I made up. It's rooted in research. It was research done by Harvard's Business School, and it was the basis of the book, The Progress Principle. I shared the research and the data, and I asked them the question again, how many of you changed your mind? Very few ever did, because they already told me 80% of them, more than 80%, select their answer based on personal needs or experiences. The reason this is important is because as leaders, we think we're responding to people's needs based on how they communicate it to us. But the reality is the way people explain how they make decisions versus how they actually make decisions is starkly different. That didn't fascinate me the most though. The most impactful result from this research, in my opinion, was this. More than 90% of people said they wish they spent more time with people they disagreed with, even though 95% said it was easier to spend time with people they agreed with. This bucks the trend that we understand about human behavior, because most human behavior can be explained by taking the path of least resistance. This is one of the few scenarios that changes that. So, what can leaders take away from this? How many times do leaders say, I wish people would go the extra mile? I wish my team would work a little harder. I wish they were more engaged. Yet when conflict arises, what's the first thing a leader does? Try to encourage compromise. I describe compromise as everyone walking away equally disappointed, and no one feels empowered to come up with a solution themselves. So, if compromise isn't the answer, conflict is a part of the answer. There needs to be more conflict in places where people feel free to express divergent opinions and discuss them rigorously, especially if you want to create an environment that produces more leaders. But that starts with all leaders being willing to change their mind. So, it starts with you. I'm here to assert that conflict is a tool. The problem with conflict is not that it has no utility. The problem with conflict is it's dangerous when used improperly. You know other tools are dangerous when used improperly? All of them. Every single tool is dangerous when used improperly. You might have to get creative with a tape measure, but you can do damage with just about anything if you really try hard enough. But if the damage a tool can do when used improperly is a reflection of its power, what does that say about conflict? What possibilities are created if conflict was deployed and used properly? What I find most fascinating about the work that I do is how difficult it is to distinguish people's ideas from their identity. That's because they're one and the same. Your identity is a story you tell yourself to justify the ideas you hold most dear, the ideas you don't question. And that is why it's so difficult for people to change their mind. It's not the data, it's the story they tell themselves. And conflict is a threat to that story. But as leaders, people don't relate to you as the story you tell yourself. They relate to you as the person they trust, the person they have to trust to make decisions in their best interest. In a world where everything is ever changing, it is impossible to be responsible for the interests of others and not change your mind constantly. In fact, more than 3 million new research articles are published every year across 20,000 peer-reviewed journals. That means we have new data every day. With new data should drive new decisions, and new decisions are the only way we can drive new results. So, if new decisions drive new results, then change is a prerequisite for progress. The problem with change is it's often a source of conflict. People resist change. They debate about how the change should be implemented or what change should be implemented at all. So if change is often a source of conflict and change is a prerequisite for progress, you could argue that conflict is necessary for progress. Because conflict often stems from change, I'm asked to come in and work with executives to drive large-scale change initiatives in their organizations. The first thing I have to present to them is the fact that change happens all the time and they're ill-prepared for it. But why is that? I'm going to argue there's a pervasive element of our culture, and I'm going to show you a couple quick examples. So the first example I show is a video by a comedian named Ronnie Chang. In 2019, Ronnie Chang released a Netflix special, and he poked fun at the insatiable nature of Americans. And he said, one day, Amazon Prime won't be enough, and they'll want Prime now, where Amazon will break into your house and hand you your package. Well, the next clip I show is a 2020 commercial where Amazon released Amazon Key. For those that aren't familiar with Amazon Key is a feature where Amazon has access to your garage door and your front door to place packages inside your house to prevent them from being stolen. What was a crazy joke in 2019 became a reality in 2020. In fact, in 2019, when Ronnie Chang made that joke, Amazon was already piloting this idea in 50 cities around the country. Just 1 year later, it was rolled out to 4,000 cities. What becomes a joke in 2019 becomes a reality in 2020. That's how fast our world changes. But if we know change is happening all the time, why do we resist it? Why do we fight it? Well, I'm going to do another social experiment right here on the stage, right here with this audience, to show why we resist change. There's a pervasive idea in our culture. I'm going to present a quote on the screen. Press this magical button, half a quote's going to come up. I'm going to say the first half of the quote that's on the screen. I'm going to ask you to finish it for me if you recognize the quote. Okay, so again, I press this button, I read a quote, you finish it for me if you recognize it. Everyone understand the instructions? All right? It's a TEDx, so don't mess this up for me, all right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Most of the audience recognize that quote. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. How many of you have said this before in your life? Most people have said it, right? It's usually justification to not change. But the truth is, waiting until something breaks is the most inefficient and expensive way to operate anything, especially a business, even more especially a government. But this happens all the time. And I was recently working with an executive group of a utility company. And I said this exact quote. And the CEO raised his hand and said, "I don't agree with you. There's a lot of things we do really well that I think we should keep doing." And on the one hand, he was right. There are a lot of things they were doing really well. On the other, that wasn't the point I was trying to make. So as a way to try to connect with the CEO, I thought back to something that happened earlier that year at that utility company. They had an explosion at one of their substations. For those that aren't familiar with a substation is where electricity is transmitted in the high voltage, is converted from the high voltage it is transmitted in to a lower voltage that's safe to operate your homes and businesses. As a result, there's a lot of critical pieces of equipment that go on to make a substation operational, and one of those pieces of equipment is called a switchgear. A switchgear is designed to protect the equipment from an electrical overload. Well, when a switchgear failed at one of these substations, it caused an explosion, leaving tens of thousands of people without power, and a lot of expensive equipment needed to be replaced. So I asked the CEO a simple question: do we wait until a switchgear fails to replace it? He says, no, we don't. He digressed, and eventually the conversation continued, but I could feel there was tension in the room, and eventually he actually left my session early, just got up and left. I decided to end the session early because I thought I failed. I clearly didn't handle that conversation well. The vibe in the room was just completely off. I decided this was a failure. If you asked me after that session, I would tell you it was the lowest point in my career. But then a month goes by, and the company newsletter comes out. At the top of the newsletter is a quote from the CEO, and it says, "We all know the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it." And for the most part, following that bit of wisdom is good advice. However, it's our job to constantly review our business operations. It was through that process we determined it was necessary to make changes. What I realized from this conversation was that session wasn't a failure. I just didn't give that CEO enough time to really digest the conversation we had, and it may maybe not have been the forum to call him out publicly in front of all of his other executives. Maybe that was a conversation him and I had in private. But at the end of the day, what I thought was the lowest point in my career was actually one of the greatest opportunities for impact for me. And so the reason I leave you with this is, chances are you're avoiding a conflict that you need to have, and you're robbing other people of the value that they can get from that conflict because you're afraid of the discomfort that conversation will create for you. In conclusion, conflict is necessary for progress. Chances are the results that you want, that you aren't creating for yourself, are on the other side of a conflict you've been avoiding, whether that conflict be within yourself or with other people. Conflict is the contagion of leadership, and leadership is the contagion of possibility. So my idea we're spreading actually isn't an idea at all, it's a question. What if conflict has been the contagion of the cure the whole time, but we've been avoiding it like the plague? Thank you.